The following may contain offensive language, adult humor, and or content that some viewers may find offensive. The views and opinions expressed by any one speaker does not explicitly or necessarily reflect or represent those of Mark Radulich or W2M Network. Please listen with caution, or don't listen at all. All right, we are back on the History of Boxing podcast. I am your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm wheezy, Mr. Mark Radulich. And joining me,
George.
Yes, and moving on up is my brother from another mother, the punchy pugilist, Mr. Toxic Masculinity to you, Kill, Murder, Sell, Rock, Pat Mullin. How do you do, sir?
Aside from the life advice in my title, as you can see, which I think is healthy for everybody, I apologize for the very, very dated reference that probably 4 of you who watch this ever will understand.
All right, let's get right into this before I completely run out of oxygen, because, you know, that's my life now. Why are we are talking about Aaron Pryor versus Alexis Argüello. Really, we're focusing on that one first fight because their rematch, it was just kind of like, I didn't cheat. You know, don't talk to me about no black bottles. And he pounded them into sand by the 10th round. So we're really focusing.
Do you have a black bottle ready for when you do run out of oxygen? That might be an idea.
I have a bottle of green tea.
Okay.
Anyway, so we're gonna focus on that. Why are we talking about Aaron Pryor versus Alexis Arguello?
It might be, for all intents and purposes, the best action fight that there's ever been. Through 14 rounds of insanity between two high level champions. You have a 3-division world champion in Arguello. You have an unbeaten world champion in Pryor. They met in the primes of their careers. And of course, as with a lot of things we talk about, there's a little bit of controversy that we'll get into with this fight. But for my money, it's honestly probably, whenever I'm asked what's the best fight of all time, this is probably the answer I give more than any other.
And that's because it was high pace and action packed throughout the entire length and breadth of the 14 rounds, and then it ended in a finish.
Among other reasons. I mean, again, there's that part of it, which is incredible. There's the skill exhibition that we see from both guys doing what they do best and how they counteract to the others.
Well, I'm asking because the last 2 times that not the last 2, the couple of History of Boxing episodes ago, we did the Luis Castillo fight. Yes. And then before that, we did Hagler-Hearns. And so in your mind, when you're talking about like the greatest fights of all time, you know, Ali Frazier 2, the Thrill in Manila, baby. What?
That was the 3rd Ali Frazier fight, Mark.
Well, now I'm thinking of the second one. Hang on. Now you're messing me up. The one where Frazier is blind at the end and Ali really gets out alive.
That is the rubber match, the Thrill in Manila. That's 3.
Okay. That's 3.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that was the second one. Doesn't matter.
2 is the snooze fest at Madison Square Garden.
Right. Okay. So anywho, moving on. We've had a couple of the greatest fights of all time. When we talked about Hagler-Hearns, we talked about it being nonstop action. The whole selling point to talking about Castillo, what's his nuts, was it was nonstop action for the entire length and breadth of and that went to decision, if I remember correctly.
No.
When did that one end?
The 10th round.
Okay, Pat. So with all of these different fights that are close in content, why does this one stand out to you?
Hagler-Hearns is great. It's 2.5 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
Castillo Corrales has maybe the greatest finish of any fight ever in history. Before that, it's a great fight, but it's the finish that sets that fight apart.
Okay.
This fight has such back and forth, such action, such skill, such contrast that it's almost kind of incomparable to think about a fight on this level fought the same way by the same types of people. At the time, again, when I'm asked what is the greatest fight of all time, this one is generally what I point to because I think it's one of those things. And it's funny, I was listening to one of our old WrestleMania broadcasts, and we talked about how they had a match between Demolition and the Powers of Pain, and how on the poster it looks fantastic. It's all beefy guys with paint ready to hit, but the similarity in style made the match not fun. Whereas on the same card, we had the Rockers and the Twin Towers, two very contrasting styles that made that so much more fun. And how each style plays to the other's weakness and strength. You have a real life version of that here at the highest level possible.
All right. So who is Aaron Pryor? Aaron Pryor, born October 20th, 1955, passed away October 9th, 2016, was in fact an American professional boxer who competed from 76, the year I was born, to 1990. He's a two-time light welterweight world champion, having held the WBA title from 1980 to 1983, and the IBF title from 84 to 85. Additionally, he held the Ring Magazine title from 80 to 83, and the Lineal title from 83 to 86. The thing about Aaron Pryor, and I want to start off our discussion with this, he kind of reminds me of a lot of like Marvin Hagler, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Like he doesn't make the main Olympic team in Montreal. He is always like chasing that respect. Everything he got, he fought twice as hard for than his peers around him, which makes it all the more satisfying that he becomes like a two-time champion. And in the year that this fight takes place, I think it's like fight of the year or something like that. So your take on Aaron Pryor and his history leading up to this fight?
Again, much like you said, guy who had to scratch and claw and wasn't given things on a silver platter because he just had some bad luck at times. And even though his talent level was at the same level as the very best guys in the sport, it's a matter of he just didn't catch the break at the right time that a lot of these other guys did. He beat Thomas Hearns in the amateurs, but he didn't beat him in the nationals when that focus and spotlight was on their fight. He beat Howard Davis at one point during the amateurs, but he lost to him in the Olympic trials, and Howard Davis goes on to win a gold medal in the Outstanding Boxer of the Games Award. And Aaron takes a job as a sparring partner for him because of that. And, nobody knew who he was because he didn't close and win those big opportunities as an amateur. And yeah, he's a great looking professional. He's got this great style and he hits hard and he's got a work ethic, but nobody knows who he is. And so there's nothing to set him apart from John Q on the street that anybody would be willing to invest in him.
Right. So Aaron Pryor, in his early career, he went undefeated all the way up until August 8th, 1987, where he lost a TKO to Bobby Joe Young. And that is after both of these fights. So going into so he wins the WBA and Ring light welterweight titles back in 1980 on August 2nd by KO in the fourth round against Antonio Cervantes. Tell me about that fight, Pat.
So Pryor had actually been campaigning as a lightweight, but couldn't get any traction or momentum. He had a ranking, but couldn't get a title shot. So the decision was made that, hey, if we jump up a division, they might think we're a softer touch and we might actually be able to get a shot at the title. So he jumps up to 140 pounds, where the reigning champion in the WBA's eyes and the lineal eyes is Antonio Kid Pambale Cervantes, who's a great fighter from Colombia, tremendous technician, had fought Wilfred Benitez, among others. But the decision is made that Pryor is going to step up and fight him, and Cervantes and his people agreed to the fight. Pryor had taken a couple fights at junior welterweight just to justify a ranking by them, but the decision is made they're going to get the shot. In the first round, he does something that happens to Aaron a lot because of Aaron's crazy style, where I don't know how much you got to watch him, Aaron, before this, but he's somebody who I picture you just loving and enjoying because it's all action all the time, in your face, bouncing, moving. He's almost like a precursor to a Manny Pacquiao type of style in that respect. But Aaron gets knocked down by a counterpunch in the first round. And his response is to immediately roll right back up to his feet, start cocking his hand and winding it up, and charging Cervantes, even though the referee has a standing 8 count.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, you've woken up the Hawk, and he just mercilessly pressure, beat on Cervantes until he finally stopped him in the 4th round and took the title, and literally took it.
He has a quick fight against I mean 3rd round TKO in November of 1980 against Danny Myers, and then he goes on a tear, retaining his title against Gaten Hart, Lennox Blackmore. These are all by TKO. Dejuan Johnson, Miguel Montilla, Akio Kamada, and that is where we get to the challenge from Alexis Argüello. So let's talk about who he is. Alexis Argüello was a Nicaraguan boxer who competed from 68 to 95 and later became a politician like you do. He was a 3-weight world champion, having held the WBA featherweight title from 74 to 76, the WBC super featherweight title from 78 to 80, and the WBC lightweight title from 81 to 82. Additionally, he held the Ring Magazine and lineal featherweight titles from 75 to 77. The Ring lightweight title from 81 to 82, and the lineal lightweight title from 80 in 82. In his later career, he challenged twice for the light welterweight titles, both times in famous fights against the aforementioned Aaron Pryor. All right, so tell us a little bit about the early career of Alexis Arguello.
One of the great nicknames of all time, the explosive thin man, because Alexis has such a thin, lanky type frame, but was an amazing power puncher, one of the greatest pure punchers that there's ever been, and such a consummate boxer that he just was able to identify these openings whenever a punch was thrown at him, or he could see the big picture and understand that, okay, now I launch this heat-seeking missile of a counter and boom, take a guy out. And he made his reputation initially based off of his incredible power punching, but as people got to see him more on television, they actually fell in love with the man because he was the most gracious and sportsmanlike champion they maybe ever seen. He was known for knocking guys out and being the first one to pick them up off the canvas and shake their hand and congratulate them on a good fight and wish them luck in the future. And he kind of endeared himself to everybody just by the way he carried himself. Like there were Spanish sports papers called him El Caballero, which means the gentleman. And despite being this ferocious, guy in the ring who's just throwing these vicious power shots that end fights, his personality shone through, and that's what made people love him so much. But it didn't hurt that he was such a great fighter, moving from division to division to division, winning world championships, beating the best fighters in those divisions, winning championships from Ruben Olivares, from Alfredo Escalera, when he moved up to lightweight and fought Jim Watt. And unlike a lot of guys, he was able to carry his power pretty fluidly as he went up in weight.
So, looking at his record, he goes undefeated. Well, hang on. He wins his first 3 fights, then he loses 2. Then he goes on quite a tear. Unfortunately, he loses to Jorge Reyes in the 6-round TKO in 1972. Gets back on his horse, racks up a bunch of wins, and then competes for the WBA featherweight title against Ernesto Marcel and loses by unanimous decision. What went wrong, Pat?
Ernesto Marcel of Panama was just a little bit better than Alexis was ready for at the time. A great champion, fought Roberto Duran early in their careers. But Marcel was very tricky and had a lot of things that Alexis hadn't quite learned everything he needed to learn yet, but Marcel had.
Gotcha. All right, well, he recovers, racks up a bunch more wins. He wins the WBA featherweight title from Ruben Olivares in a 13th round KO in Englewood in the Hood, California, 1974. Retains against Lionel Hernandez. Won the vacant ring featherweight title and retained the WBA against Rigoberto Riasco in 1975. Retained again against Royal Kobayashi, who will be wrestling this weekend for New Japan Pro Wrestling.
If he ever gets up from the body shot that Alexis hit him with to put him out.
He retained again.
One of the most crushing body shot knockouts I've ever seen. It was horrendous to watch. I hurt every time I watch it.
So one of the things I'm noticing as I'm going through his is that he had a lot of fights. Not all of them he put the title up for grabs. What gives?
Mm-hmm. It wasn't uncommon at that point in time for a lot of champions to take over the weight bouts or just take a stay busy fight. But a lot of times, one, you can't get a true rated contender every time you want to fight one, which sounds
Mhm.
crazy, but a lot of guys want adequate prep time to be ready for a fight.
No,
And
I
so
know
a
what's
lot,
going on in the modern heavyweight division. I understand you can't get a good you can't get a good ranked contender every time.
well, you couldn't then because guys were a little more active then, and
And now you
but
can't
a
because
lot of
everyone
times
stinks. Sorry. I'm bitter.
we'll do a whole show on the fall apart of Usyk Fury soon, Mark. Don't worry, you can vent on that.
Oh, that's gonna be me and a blanket and a thumb and crying the whole time.
But again, it wasn't an uncommon practice for a lot of champions to take over the weight bouts or just stay busy fights to keep sharp. And a lot of times, one reason being a sanctioning body, whether it's WBA, WBC, whoever, wouldn't recognize such a fight for their championship if they deem that this guy isn't even rated in their top 10, so they won't recognize it as a championship fight. It's not the champion's prerogative to put their title up on the line all the time. But also, too, a lot of these bouts are contested at maybe if it's not at the next division up, it's at a catch weight of 130 pounds or 128 pounds, what have you, just to stay busy and active and get some work in, get a TV payday if you can.
I was like, he's fighting every 2 to 3 months here.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think if you can maintain that schedule and stay healthy, it's a great thing because it keeps you motivated, it keeps you sharp, it keeps your weight on point without getting too far out there. On the negative side, there's the potential of if you're taking a lot of damage in these fights, more than you should be, then your body's going to break down sooner than it should. But Alexis was a guy who had a pretty dedicated training regime and good team around him, and was not a guy who took a ton of damage in his fights, even when he lost. Alexis's stylistic problem wasn't with guys being able to punch with him, because that was suicide if you tried to do that with him. He had trouble with movers and cuties and guys who were evasive. That's what really was his kryptonite. So in those fights,
we're gonna get there.
he's not really getting beat up.
Right. Well, it's just funny because part of why we do this is to look back at the way boxing once was, comparing it to what it is now. The average fighter, what, 2 fights a year, if that?
2, max 3.
Yeah. A lot of guys, 1 fight a year.
You look at the template of like the star level guys, which let's call Alexis a star at the point in time this fight takes place for sure. But you look at a Canelo. Canelo fights 1 weekend in May, 1 weekend in September.
Yep. That's it. Tyson Fury, orbits the earth, passes by like a comet every couple of centuries.
Yeah, one in April, 1 in November, I think is the regular Fury schedule at this point, right?
Something like that. Deontay Wilder was going for a pretty good clip there, but then he ran afoul of Tyson Fury and COVID, and that was the end of that. He had the 1 fight last year in October against Robert Helenius. He doesn't even have anything scheduled for this year yet. No. Andy Ruiz had the Luis Ortiz fight. I mean, and he wants to fight again, but
even the lower weight guys, since we're talking here, like let's go to 140 pounds since we're in that division anyway. We'll look at Tank and Ryan, and Tank and Ryan are scheduled to fight on April 22nd, which is great. We're going to actually get the fight. Tank said, no warm up for me. I'm just going to wait till that fight rolls around. Good for him on it, I guess.
Right. And he hasn't fought in what, 6-8 months?
I think it's going to be 6 at the time they actually fight. So yeah,
that's why I wanted to have a quick conversation about the wisdom of being busy, and it seems to be lost on modern fighters.
It has its pros, it has its cons, like anything else too. And also, let's be fair and talk about the money situation where these guys in this fight are not going to make anywhere near what guys are making now for lesser fights. So there's also that part of it too, which is in all fairness to the modern era.
Yeah, you don't have to be working the territory to make your bread, because you only need the 1 or 2 paydays a year to keep you going.
Right. It's a different business model now with the advent of pay-per-view and streaming and these things. And,
plus I think like guys like Gervonta Davis, I know Deontay Wilder, a lot of these guys, they're divested. They get the first couple of big paychecks, and after they bought Mama House, they're starting businesses.
Yeah, they're owning, this business or buy into a successful business for a percentage, just keep the cash flow going. It's the right thing to do. Obviously, right. good for them on it for having a plan outside of boxing.
Who's my favorite fighter right now for that? Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather will take any stupid shit fight that people will pay him for, and he's like, I don't care. I'm building buildings.
Yeah, I'll take this $10 million exhibition in Dubai against this former, housemate on UK Big Brother, and With
Right.
that, I will now start a construction company that's going to be based in Las Vegas around the Strip. So
Yeah. He's just like, if y'all he's like what's his face from The Wire. It's just like, I'll take anybody's money if they just giving it away. And I love it. I think that's hilarious. Anyway, back to the subject at hand. So yes, he KOs Salvador Torres, retains the world title in 76, racks up more and more and more and more and more and more. Now we're at 56-4. He's won the WBC super featherweight title against Alfredo Escalera.
the bloody battle of Bayamon, as it's called.
That was in round 13. He had another non-title fight against Mario Mendez, and then he retains against Ray Tam and Diego Alcala. Loses, we're not even there yet. Oops. Loses against Villamar Fernandez. And Madison Square Garden, boy, if you're going to lose, that's what a place to lose in.
And against the rated lightweight, Villamar Fernandez, tremendous fighter, would fight for the lightweight title against Roberto Duran and lose. But again, a guy who had that style that would always trouble Alexis through the course of his career.
All right, retains his title a bunch more times. And then finally, after winning the WBC and ring lightweight titles against Jim Watt and a bunch of retentions, we finally, after knocking out Kevin Rooney, who was just walking to the bathroom at the time, this poor guy, just in Atlantic City at Bally's Park Place.
Not the worst thing that ever happened to Kevin Rooney in Atlantic City.
Just Alexis Argüello, boom, knocks him out. It's like, hey, are we even fighting? He's like, yes, pay me.
So I'll tell you a story about that.
Yeah.
Kevin Rooney was very friendly with a lot of my family members and friends of my family members at the time.
Okay.
So it was a big deal. Everybody was going to go to Atlantic City to watch him fight Alexis Arguello. And, my dad's a big fight fan, but has a pretty good idea that Alexis is going to probably knock Kevin out. Kevin's trained by Teddy Atlas at the time. The two of them are, training under Customato at the time. And so Kevin loses the fight by knockout. It happens. There's still, an after party and everything that everybody's kind of hanging out for and whatever. And allegedly, somebody got into some kind of beef with Kevin, and my uncle made a comment to Rooney along the lines of, why, so you can get knocked out again? Something like that. Now, Kevin is, 140-pound contender at the time, but he's also a guy who's working his butt off fighting. And, saying something like that to an actual professional fighter, not something you should do.
No.
And apparently like 6 people held Kevin back from committing murder. Yeah. Kevin, he gets characterized because his, more involvement, his involvement as Tyson's head trainer for his prime years. And, trained Vinny Paz later. And he has kind of a character's type of voice, but Kevin was a tough guy with a hard work ethic and a good guy. So saying something like that and that would set him off to nearly kill somebody is not the best idea.
Not at all. All right, so let's talk about the fight itself. And I want to read this right from the wiki because I think it's hilarious. Both fighters had radically opposing public images. Arguello was suave, sophisticated, and extremely humble about his impressive accomplishments, which garnered him great admiration from both the boxing community and the media. Pryor, on the other hand, was fearsome, intimidating, and despite possessing great talent and having been a peer of great Sugar Ray Leonard and Thomas Hearns, was the recipient of limited media coverage. I'm sorry, are we talking about Hagler or Sugar Ray Leonard at this point? Like, it's the same damn thing.
Well, Aaron was very big on calling out Ray Leonard a lot during this time too.
I'm sure he was.
Yeah.
So, all right. Tell us about how we got to this fight. And I know there's like this one was another one where getting it set up there was a whole bunch of controversy. So lay them out for me.
So it wasn't super, super controversial, but there's, posturing like anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Arguello's coming off probably the biggest star-making performance of his TV years, where he had knocked out Ray Mancini, Boom Boom Mancini, that everybody kind of has heard of.
Yep.
Yeah. And at the end of that fight, he's hugging him and kissing him, telling him how much he loves his father, because the story behind Ray is Ray's fighting to win a world title for his dad, who got denied the opportunity based on World War II service and an injury. And at the end of this fight, a brutal, great fight that went to the 14th round, Arguello's, mercilessly pounding Ray at the end of this fight. And 2 minutes later, he's kissing him on the cheek, telling him he loves his dad and anything he can do for him, let him know, and he'd be happy to. But they're, the quote of Alexander the Great is, and he's looked around the world and wept as there were no new worlds to conquer. So the only thing left for Alexis to do is try to do something unprecedented. So the idea is to move up to 140 pounds and try to be the first ever 4-weight world champion. So Pryor at this point in time is also looking for a big payday, and he's having trouble landing anything. And he can't get the big guys in there. He can't get fights with Leonard and Hearns because they're negotiating to fight each other and so on. And Ray gets his detached retina and is out of the sport. Tommy moves up to 154. It's not there for Aaron, those big fights. And there's not really another champion at 140 who's of great interest to the public at this point. So finally, Bob Arum, who's going to promote this fight and is Alexis' promoter of record, reaches out to Buddy LaRosa, who's the manager of Aaron Pryor, who is literally a pizzeria owner with some small businesses in Pryor's hometown in Cincinnati. And the decision's made that, hey, you need a fight to get you paid. We want to make history. This is win-win. Let's do it. But because Pryor's the champion, his camp tries calling some of the shots. And one of the shots they wanted to call was they wanted it to possibly be a 12-round fight as opposed to be a 15-round fight. And, this is a month prior to Duk Koo Kim, unfortunately, being killed in the ring against Ray Mancini, where sanctioning bodies use that as a rallying cry to get fights from 15 to 12 rounds. In reality, that push had been happening prior to that fight, largely because of network TV time constraints. And that was really the big motivator to try to get 12 rounds as opposed to 15. They just used the tragedy to try to further their agenda. Shocking in the world, I know. But that was the thing. And looking at them and evaluating, Arguello and his team, headed up by Eddie Futch, possibly the greatest trainer in history, knew that the 13th, 14th, 15th, that's where Alexis shines. Those are his rounds. Mm-hmm. And they just had this feeling that they knew if they could get Pryor extended to those rounds, they were going to take him out and become, history, make history as a 4-division world champion. And Pryor's camp knew Alexis's reputation is in those rounds. Pryor doesn't go 13, 14, 15, and the style he fights is not really one designed to go there, right? Because it's just frenetic pace and energy and all over, bouncing here, bouncing there, punch here, off angle. Watching Aaron Pryor will make you lose your breath. So, there was the thought process that he'd be able to outbox him and outpoint Alexis over 12 rounds, or possibly have enough gas to stop him if he could continue that assault for 12 rounds.
Right.
Now, what happened was they couldn't agree to 12 rounds, and because that hadn't been an official thing, the fight was scheduled for 15 when Pryor's people realized, hey, if we don't take this fight and this money, we're going to be fighting for, less than half this money against some guy who, for all we know, could upset us. So they agreed to that, and then the purses were agreed to as career highs for both guys at this time. I think it was $1.6 million for Arguello and $1.5 for Aaron, which I think at this point in time, those purses would be around the neighborhood of like $3 million and change for each guy, which is still very low nowadays when you consider that. And no pay-per-view points or anything like that because it was airing on HBO.
I was gonna say it's like 10 to 30 million, I think, on the average for the big stars.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else about the lead up to the fight?
So I think it's important to kind of, we've discussed the principles. Arguello's head trainer is Eddie Futch, who we talked about a lot on our Heavyweight History podcast, where he's the trainer of record for Joe Frazier, Ken Norton, Larry Holmes, Riddick Bowe, so many of the top guys, because as he's called affectionately, Papa Smurf just had this eye and understood how to bring the best out of these guys. Pryor's corner is a little more dubious, and we're going to talk about that. Pryor's head trainer is a guy named Panama Lewis, who had come up, as his name implies, in Panama. He had been part of Roberto Duran's training team for a while, but Panama started getting his own rep as a trainer and breaking guys in, and he was a trainer of some repute at this point, Pryor being this star pupil as the destroyer of junior welterweights everywhere. And so you have this fight, you have the principals, you have their teams. The venue is chosen as the Orange Bowl in Miami, which had not hosted a big fight like this before. Reason being, Arguello was based in Miami at this point and had a huge following there because he had left Nicaragua, his home country, like a lot of other Nicaraguans, because of the communist takeover from the Sandinista government. And Alexis was initially supportive of their takeover because they were unhappy with their government. And what resulted was, once Alexis kind of understood that the Sandinistas allegedly wanted to take control of his career and his finances and all this stuff. He wasn't willing to do business that way. And as a result, they took his holdings, they took his home, they evicted his mother from her home, and he took his family to Miami, where there was a large Latino and Latina population in the United States. So it was a little easier to get established. Fortunately, because of his high-profile athletic career, he was able to get in there, get a foothold, and establish himself there relatively quickly, along with his family.
Okay. So here we go. Aaron Pryor, Alexis Argüello, the Battle of the Champions, November 12th, 1982, at the Miami Orange Bowl in Florida. And I'll tell you, I watched this fight, and you're not kidding. This is like Aaron Pryor comes roaring out of that corner. And when you think about it, I was showing my son some stuff in the pool while we were on the cruise over spring break. And I was like, you can't just throw and stand still. You got to throw and move. You know, you got to be moving because the other guy's going to throw back at you. So you can't just kind of throw and like watch your, be amazed at what you just did. You got to throw, move.
Don't admire your work.
Yeah, don't admire your work. And when I see Aaron Pryor fight, that's what I noticed. His head never stopped moving. He was always like ducking and slipping punches. Like he made himself extremely hard to hit, but he never stopped throwing punches either. It's pretty incredible.
He has a quote when he's talking about when he was a kid before he even started boxing. He was walking by his mom, and his mom smacked him in the back of the head. And he was like, "Mama, what'd you do that for?" She goes, "Why didn't you move your head?" He goes, "I didn't know I was supposed to."
Yeah, they talked about that in their commentary about how it becomes just muscle memory at this point.
Yeah.
You're not even thinking about what you're doing anymore. Your body automatically knows to move.
And the way Pryor did it, Pryor does it. He's not your typical Floyd Mayweather where I'm going to stand right in front of you, move my head this way, ride your punch, and you're still not going to hit me, and I'm going to work a Philly shell. Pryor is going to throw a 3-punch combination and slip to his right, sliding, and then immediately throw another combination, and then slide to his left and throw immediately another combination, and then continue this. And it's high risk, high reward because a lot of times he's moving his head before his body moves, and he's moving his body before his head moves, or he's throwing punches off balance from this odd, impossible angle that you don't know a guy can throw punches from. And he's doing it. And a lot of times he does it better than anybody and executes, and it's great. And then on the flip side, you have Arguello, who's not going to match that activity level, does not fight that way. But again, he's got the great equalizer being that power. And what happens is he tries to catch Pryor, but the times when he does catch Pryor, he catches him, and Pryor's either shook or knocked off balance badly, or it's such an interesting contrast.
Alexis Argüello, for his part, he's also got a lot of movement going. Aaron Pryor takes some pretty hard shots in this fight. But a lot like the Hagler-Hearns fight, they're just walking through it. And, unlike the Castillo fight where they were leaning on each other, this one, they're kind of just standing and moving and circling. Like, this is not in the phone booth. This is
fought much more like a traditional boxing match where you have guys at range, at mid-range, inside briefly, and then back outside at range, and they're using the entirety of the ring. And that's part of, like I said, the contrast. These dramatically different styles that mesh together.
If this is Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, or Muhammad Ali and any one of the guys he fought at that time, I think this is more widely recognized in the mainstream. Because people in the mainstream kind of know. Now, I don't know about now because I say stuff now and I feel like people look at me like I'm from another planet. But I say the Rumble in the Jungle or the Thrill in Manila. I talk about Ali Frazier. I talk about Ali Foreman. I talk about all these like great fights, Hagler-Hearns. Sometimes like I remember, and I know I've used this euphemism before, but like I read a book about Chinese food restaurants, and the book is the top 10 Chinese food restaurants in the world. And she was like, look, I know that some of you are going to be like, no, I know a place that's in the basement of some flower shop. And
like there's all the places on Mott Street that people don't know about.
Right. And like, I'm not talking about those places. Like, there has to be a certain level of like legitimacy here. And that's kind of how I feel about like this fight, where if it's big name fighters having the exact same fight, everyone knows about this fight. But because it's guys who, I think I was telling somebody earlier, like, I'm talking about Aaron Pryor versus Alexis Arguello, and they're like, Aaron Pryor, the comedian? No, it's fucking Richard Pryor. God damn it. So it's a shame because it's one of the reasons why I think it's fun to put a spotlight on it, because this really is, over the course of 14 rounds, a pretty incredible fight. But we do have to talk about the black bottle. There was a couple of times where throughout the fight, Aaron's looking a little tired, and there's mention of the water bottle, and he comes out, and they're like, where is he getting this energy from? And then it becomes like patently obvious between rounds 13 and 14. And that's the one that everyone sort of points to, that there was a stimulant possibly in the water. I mean, I think one commentator was just like, he says the one that I mixed. Last time I checked, you don't mix water. So what's in there? In a different time, in a different world, we get answers, but there was no piss test. There was no nothing. The water was not tested. It's a lot of different things.
So, well, yeah, the Keystone Cops running the athletic commission, and it was the newly formed Miami Boxing Commission, and this was their first big fight, and they dropped the ball pretty bad on this one.
You never know what you don't know until you go through the motions and you realize, doing things like before and after piss tests, testing water, checking gloves, all things that we take for granted now. Like, if you ever, like, I know you do, but if you've ever sat with people that don't watch boxing, like I had people over Saturday night to watch Benavidez Plant, and for those that were in the room at the time, like, they're watching them check the gloves, they're watching them do all the pageantry beforehand. Like, why do they do all that? And like, stop from cheating. Like, you have to, or someone will.
Yeah. And that's like, yeah, you talked about, you mentioned the commentary after the fact saying, when they referenced him audibly saying the one I mixed, the guy saying, I don't know that you mix water with water.
Right.
And again, you would see these instances in hindsight after the course of the fight where, if there's particularly a round where Pryor visibly slows down because Arguello had been, the plan's going into this, Arguello knows that he can't match Pryor's activity level. So what he's going to do is every time that he's able to touch him, he has to hurt him. He has to hit him hard.
Right.
And he does that. And oftentimes it's the Pryor's body before he starts bringing it upstairs. They're less concerned in Pryor's corner when he's getting hit to the body. But once Arguello starts landing flush shots to Pryor's chin, then they're like, oh, we need to fix this. And then you go back and you watch those in-between breaks in the rounds, and you see this little black bottle come out, and all of a sudden Pryor's got a rejuvenated pep in his step and is springing around the ring like it's round one again.
I don't want to... Certainly certain substances will have an immediate effect, but I'm not entirely sure something diluted with water would have like such an immediate... I mean, some of that had to have been psychosomatic.
I'm sure there's a little bit of a placebo effect. However, as we'll talk about more, one of Lewis's fighters had said that one of the things he was famous for doing in between rounds is breaking ammonia capsules and breaking, it's not illegal, but it was frowned upon and then eventually was made illegal. But also what he would do is take asthma medication and break that up and throw it into a water bottle. Because, as someone who might have had trouble breathing will understand, or asthmatics will understand, the purpose of that medication is to open up your lung capacity and give you the ability to breathe better, and your energy level as your breath rises will rise in conjunction with that.
Right.
Now, you take somebody who is not an asthmatic and is a high-level performing athlete, and you give them that, it is, in fact, a performance-enhancing drug at that point.
Right. All right, so he comes out in the 14th, just hammers Arguello.
After Arguello had, two of his better rounds in the fight.
Right.
He hits Pryor with that one right hand in the 13th round, and Pryor's head literally snaps back and looks at the lights.
He ended the fight with 20 some odd unanswered shots. And before the ref was like, okay, we're done here. What do you think of the finish?
It was as brutal a finish as you'll ever see. And it was unnecessary. Stanley Christodoulou was the referee, and Stanley Christodoulou is a referee and a judge. He has a lot of experience. I don't know what took him so long to step in there and say, this has been enough.
I think there was talk in the entire length of the fight that they could not let this go to the judges' scorecards. that this was yet another one where we have one fighter who's Elmer Fudd and another fighter who is Daffy Duck, surrounded by a bunch of Daffy Ducks. And they knew that they're not getting a decision, as close as this fight was. So I think that ref was like, okay, I know what my job here is, somewhat to protect Alexis Arguello. So I think he's like, it kind of reminded me of like the Brock Lesnar Shane Carwin thing. Like, I'm gonna let this go, even though you're out fucking cold. But I'm gonna give you the chance because you're like, you're the golden goose. And he wasn't coming back.
No, I mean, in a sport where the deaths ring harder in that sport than any other, because generally the deaths that come from boxing are a direct result of the action you've seen in the fight that's occurred.
Right.
To see Alexis when he's hurt against the ropes getting hit, and then there's that point in time against there where it just looks like Pryor hitting the double end bag and it's snapping back, because he's literally just right hand and Arguello's just taking it along the ropes, and he's literally rebounding off the ropes into other right hands, not defending himself. Having seen guys who were killed in fights, having seen serious brain injury occur during fights, that was one of the scarier images you'll see when it comes to the potential of that happening.
It should have been stopped earlier, but again, I think that referee was like, come on, Alexis, like, wake up, baby. And then, after a while, you're like, well, I'm either going to stop this or he dies. So.
And honestly, like, I don't want to think about how close that could have potentially come to happening, because it was that vicious and that brutal. You can't fault Pryor for that. And I want to make that point clear. Pryor's doing what he's supposed to do.
No, I mean, like, going all the way back to our history of boxing, like Jack Dempsey, when there's no rule about like standing over an opponent, it's Jack Dempsey, right?
Yes.
Where he's just standing over guys and like knocking them down, because he's allowed to. It's fight. It's funny. I've been watching the last season of Claws from 2021, and the brother-in-law from Breaking Bad's in the show, and he's in like cage fighting, but it's like literally no rules cage fighting. It's just like it is just fight to the death, and he's like biting a guy's ear off. That's the things you can do when you don't have any rules.
Yeah, it's a different world, like when we used to go fight in the smokers and stuff, they would tell you, do not go out there and fight like this is the Marquis of Queensberry rules. You need to go do what you need to do to win.
Yeah.
And you hear that as a 15-year-old kid and you're like, ooh, okay.
How many elbows did you throw?
What's that?
How many elbows did you throw?
I was more notorious for clinching and tying up and then just throwing low blows.
Yeah, Jonas and I talked about that. Clean in there, we'll shot in the nuts. We'll be fine.
Yeah, once in a while, get the knee up, and
yeah.
But again, like, and now back to reality. Pryor's doing what he's supposed to be doing. He's doing everything he's supposed to do to win a fight at that point. Yeah. He has his man hurt along the ropes. He needs to do what he needs to do to get him out of there. It's not his job to determine when that stoppage is. It's the referee's job.
Occasionally you have a fighter like looks at the ref like, "What are you doing?" But
yeah. and to be honest, Arguello's corner should have thrown the towel, and a little sooner than they needed to. But again, it's a little trickier for the corner points. We get that, where Arguello's longtime friend Don Kahn was usually the guy in charge of that part of it, and Eddie, because Eddie was older, Eddie wasn't necessarily throwing a towel and reaching up in there, so Don Kahn could have been the one to grab the towel and stop it, but them being close personal friends, that relationship gets difficult. So I understand that part of it too.
All right. So Aaron Pryor wins. He wins all the belts in a 14th round stoppage. And then because of the water bottle incident, we get a rematch. And Aaron Pryor beats him again, this time in the 10th round. And there's no question this time. None at all. So let's talk about where these fighters go from there.
Well, let's address a couple things from the controversy of that, right?
Okay.
So after that fight, there's a huge public outcry because it's audible on HBO. Give me the other bottle, the one I mixed.
Right.
There's bigger outcry, especially within the boxing community, when you find out that the newly formed Miami Boxing Commission did not perform any post-fight urinalysis, anything of the kind. They didn't confiscate the bottle to test whatever was in it. None of those procedures were followed. Pryor's living the high life for all of 10 minutes and enjoying it. He finally got his marquee opponent. He got a huge win over him, retained his title. But there's this big black cloud cast over it, just like a lot of things in his life, unfortunately. where there's this element of controversy that's taking away from what should be the proudest moment of his life to this point. And it's one of those things where even he got a phone call from Arguello, and Arguello said, "Man to man, I need to know, was there anything in that bottle?" And Pryor told him no. And I probably believe that Pryor believed there was nothing in that bottle.
Yeah, I don't think anyone told him what was in it.
That's the thing. I would probably definitively state that Aaron Pryor believed everything he did was of his own volition.
My understanding is that there was like a diuretic in there.
That's what they say. Pryor's camp alternatively said that it was either a medicine used to control diarrhea that he had been having, or that it was schnapps, peppermint schnapps for the same purpose.
Okay.
I tend to go along with Barry Tompkins, who called the fight, where there's not a doubt in my mind that there was absolutely a stimulant of some kind in that bottle that spurred Pryor onto that. Again, just looking at the instances during the fight where there was that little bit of extra giddy up after he had taken a beating in a round, and all of a sudden he's back out fresh as a daisy. It's not common.
Yeah.
There's people who will tell you, oh, but this guy came back fresher after. Not that rapidly, not to that level. And, Arguello had the quote that during that fight, he said, "I've never been hit with two fists at the same time," which tells you kind of where the activity level was.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not trying to absolve Aaron or anything like that, but I genuinely believe he had no idea that there was anything in that bottle other than water. And I will always believe that until proven otherwise.
All right. So, like I said, Aaron, they had their rematch. He then goes on to win the inaugural IBF light welterweight title in June 22nd of 84. Retains against Gary Hinton in 85. Loses a non-title fight of some description against Bobby Joe Young.
Yeah. Well, on.
And then finishes out his career at 39-1 with 3 more victories, all by KO or TKO. 40 fights, 39 wins, 1 loss. 1 loss to Bobby Joe Young.
And even that, a lot of people think he took a dive. Because if you look at when he gets knocked down in that fight by Bobby Joe, who's a very good fighter, also not far from Aaron. He was from Youngstown, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron kind of gets knocked down, gets up, goes back down, almost crosses himself like a Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
It was very strange. And this is after Pryor had a very brief retirement, where he retires after the second Arguello fight, and then comes back. And once he retires, he's stripped of the WBA title. So he wins the IBF title in his first comeback fight back. He's in litigation with Sylvester Stallone's promotional company that he had signed a deal with to be repped by them. And there's a lawsuit about that. And his comeback, he doesn't look like the same guy in a lot of these fights. Like he's going in his first 2 fights, he goes the distance both times. He goes the distance in his first fight with Furlano for the title. And then Gary Hinton, he goes the distance, and it's a split decision. And people are like, he doesn't look so great. And then he takes, a year and a half off before the Bobby Joe Young fight. Again, not a normal, thing to do. Gets knocked out in that fight, although, somewhat dubious. And then he has 3 more fights, of varying degrees over 88 and then 2 in 90, where he's basically legally blind in one eye at this point and just skirts around state athletic commissions and drug testing and the like to go on. But, Pryor, he's having a lot of problems in his life, especially with drugs during this time.
Yeah.
And it's something that's going to plague him for a long time. And I think I don't know how much of that is the psychological ramification from the first fight with Alexis, where you think, okay, they do a rematch, he's going to win the second one, and okay, he wins the second one, and yeah, it's great, and he does that, but it still doesn't net him the same recognition that winning that first fight with no controversy would have. And they try to say, oh, well, we beat him in 10 the second time instead of 14, and we didn't have any black bottle or anything then, but by that same token, you look at the punishment Arguello took in that 14th round and through the course of that fight, you're not going to be the same fighter after that.
All right. Also, 85, 86, who's fighting at that time?
In that weight class, there's some guys there.
No, I mean in the heavyweight.
Oh, well, you have the come up of Mike Tyson.
Right. So, yeah, that's where everyone's eyeballs are. All right. Alexis Argüello, after the second loss, Aaron Pryor, he has a couple of Midland victories, loses his last fight against Scott Walker by unanimous decision, January 21st, 1995. 85 fights, 77 wins, 8 losses. And that ends our story of Aaron Pryor versus Alexis Argüello. Both of those men, I think, hit the zenith of their career with fighting each other. And then after that, it was more or less over.
Well, and you know, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about Panama Lewis.
Yes.
Aaron's head trainer. So each guy kind of has upheaval in their camps. One forced, one not. Alexis, after the first fight with Aaron Pryor, fired Eddie Futch as his head trainer, which he would go on to call the greatest mistake he ever made. He initially blamed Eddie for why he lost and realized how bad that was of him to do and publicly apologized to Eddie Futch profusely, saying this was a mistake, but ended up not working with him again, unfortunately. And I think part of that was Eddie was like, I'll accept your apology, but I can't work with you after that, which is understandable. But Aaron Pryor's head trainer, Panama Lewis, who had interjected himself into this fight in as controversial a manner as you can, wasn't quite done with trying to top himself in that regard. You know, the next year in 1983, Panama would have a fight with a middleweight he had named Louis Resto, fighting an up-and-comer named Billy Collins Jr. And there's an entire documentary about this fight called Assault in the Ring, which is very well done. I highly recommend watching it. But Panama, at this point, prior to this fight, where Resto was a huge underdog to the undefeated Collins, Resto was a light puncher with a suspect chin. But in this fight, batters Collins, swells both of his eyes grotesquely. He really administers a beating that nobody would have ever expected. And at the end of the fight, Billy Collins' father, who's his trainer, goes to shake Resto's hand after the fight to congratulate him. Feels his gloves. There's no padding in his gloves. And like you talked about, where, you know, they check the gloves at the beginning of a fight and everything, it wasn't as common a practice then as it is now, and this is because of that.
Right.
So they found that Lewis had removed all of the padding from Resto's gloves. On top of that, they applied a plaster of Paris to his hand wraps, which will cause the hand wraps to harden like plaster that you would use on a wall. So essentially, you have 2 bricks at the end of a guy's forearms that he is punching the other guy with.
Right.
And, you know, once Panama was found guilty of that, I think it damned Pryor from the first fight even further.
Right.
Where it was pretty much, this isn't arguable. There was something in there. This guy's a known cheat at this point. There was something going on. And Resto, in later years, has talked about how Panama would use the asthma medication constantly for those guys, did the plaster of Paris deal with the stripping of the gloves. And so Panama is banned from boxing for life, and correctly so at that point. So Pryor's going to change trainers. He trains with Richie Giacchetti shortly, but they can't agree on anything because Pryor's drug use is getting really bad. He turns to Emmanuel Stewart, who was the trainer of his amateur nemesis, Thomas Hearns, and they work together for the Arguello fight, but that relationship doesn't last. And without kind of a strong figure leading him, Aaron, from a fatherless home, kind of just goes off and does his own thing and falls into a state of drug abuse and abuses his body. He loses the sight in his eye, and unfortunately, a lot of Aaron's money is taken from him through various things that went on, and it was a steep fall from grace from a guy who should have been riding very, very high at the time. And Aaron goes on to kind of reform his life in a lot of ways, and a great thing. He worked as a drug counselor, married the love of his life, his wife Frankie, and did a lot of great positive things before his untimely passing in 2016.
All right. Anything else about Alexis Arguello or anything left unsaid?
So after his fighting career, Alexis, also struggled with substance abuse. The prior fight left him in a pretty bad depression, and he developed a serious cocaine problem. A lot of that led to those really late comeback fights that were ill-advised, and everybody was telling him, Alexis, you do not need to be fighting. What are you doing this for?
Right.
Because of all the upheaval that had happened in Nicaragua, he decided to use his celebrity to try to help, and he got involved politically, mended fences with the Sandinista Party, which had changed some of its ideologies and things, becomes the mayor of Managua, which is the capital city of Nicaragua, and his big platform is human rights. And So allegedly, because he was having friction with the Sandinista party, which wanted to go back to a stronger communist fold, and Alexis was resistant to that, Alexis was found dead via a shotgun blast through the chest in his home. That is ruled surreptitiously a suicide.
Oh my God.
I don't know of anybody in history who committed suicide via a shotgun, which you'd have to hold, yay far apart and still be able to pull the trigger to your chest.
Yeah.
But again, things are different. We talked a while back about the Arturo Gatti suicide and things of that nature. And this appeared to be a straight up murder that was covered up and brought, unfortunately, an untimely end to a legacy that was a very great man who was better than the sport he was great in. And I think it is very cool that despite everything that went on between them, he and Pryor helped each other through their substance abuse, through everything, and became great friends later in life who were committed to each other's causes. Pryor made appearances when Arguello was campaigning for mayor. Pryor could call up Arguello to help him with a drug counseling session to help people. Talk about how they had everything that came back, and they came back stronger. And that's the best part of their legacies is what they did together afterward.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, all right. That does, in fact, conclude our History of Boxing podcast on Aaron Pryor versus Alexis Argüello. I believe the next one we are doing, we had to move a bunch of these around for one reason or another. Barrera.
Hey, we got April 29th free now.
Yeah. April 27th, the Barrera Morales trilogy. That's up next.
Oh, my heart.
That'll be Thursday at 10 o'clock. Assuming Pat's internet doesn't freak out on him.
And then April 29th, we'll do our own version of Fury Usyk.
Oh my God. Yeah.
We could talk about all kinds of why that didn't happen.
Well, it's not dead yet. We have till April 1st. That's their deadline. I mean, I know it's a all the way collapse, but maybe they kick up.
Yeah, they'll get it right for us on April Fool's Day.
There you go. All righty. Last night we reviewed John Wick. Tomorrow, Alexis and Zach Strobel will be reviewing History of the World Part 1. This being WrestleMania weekend, Friday there's a re-air of our Roddy Piper tribute that we did back on Blog Talk Radio a few years ago. Saturday, Pat comes back again. It's a re-air of his Everyone Loves a Bad Guy on Dr. Doom, one of the most listened to podcasts ever on our network. And then on Sunday, we have another Metal
You're
Hammer.
so lucky we just covered Alexis Arguello when I want to be a gentleman about it.
And then Sunday, we have Triple Brutal. Next week, we've got A Long Road to Ruin for 48 Hours, the review of Dungeons and Dragons, and Jason and I are going to be doing a triple feature of horror movies that are currently streaming. Sick, Children of the Corn, the new 2023 remake, and There Is Something Wrong with the Children. All right,
hey, is there a horror movie that's more grossly mistaken for another than Children of the Corn being mistaken for Village of the Damned?
I couldn't tell you. All right, Pat, you got anything?
Yeah, I thought I did, but maybe not. I don't know. It's one of those things, everybody. Yeah, I'll be doing the Morales-Barrera trilogy with Mark here, my favorite fight trilogy of all time, regardless of sport, anything. I just think it's the best. And
Pat's going to come back and do a Damn You Hollywood for Big George Foreman.
I will. I will be back for Damn You Hollywood with Big George Foreman. Looking forward to that. Are we doing season 2 of How I Met Your Father at some point?
We never did season 1.
Yes, we did.
No.
Yes, we did.
No, we were supposed to, and then it never happened.
Well, okay then. We'll be doing a joint season 1 and 2 review of How I Met Your Father at some point.
We are? Where was I in the decision-making process?
You gave me the other bottle, the one I mixed.
Okay. Dr. Ronnie.
Yeah, that's pretty much all I think we're cooking on right now. I could be wrong. I'm going to try to get Mark to do a triple feature of boxing movies if we don't get Fury Usyk, and we'll include The Great White Hype as one of them that I can count him in on it.
All right, folks. I've made it through another podcast alive. Another victory for me. Be well, be safe, and behave.